This is Python's Paradise. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena, located in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, but I got the beautiful Toronto background behind me because, well, I love Toronto. But here we are on November the 16th, 2023, and I have a return guest and a return tribute. Because when people passed on, I love doing tribute interviews and uh, interviewing somebody in tribute to George Litto had opened up a lot for me on the on getting people from Dress to Kill on my show, and so I had his daughter on here in tribute to him a few years back, and I was quite flattered when this time she reached out to me to promote a documentary about her dad. And I was like, wow, I was touched. So I must have did something well in that first tribute for her to reach out to me. Folks, I give you the daughter of George Litto, Miss Andria Litto herself. How do you do, Andria?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you, Greg. I'm doing great. I
Yeah.
I'm really I appreciate that. Well, one of the reasons I reached out to you is because you are one of the people who did a tribute to my father, and a tribute it was. You seem to know a lot about his work, but film fans everywhere that listen to your show, I thought it was really important to show them more because we talked a lot about my father's career as a producer.
Hmm.
But what I did is a documentary that started his career both as a jazz musician who wrote a song that Louis Armstrong ended up recording called and
And let's not
true.
forget his granddaughter is getting into music, huh?
Yes, she is. So music runs in my family. It's in our veins. I sing. He was a jazz saxophonist and pianist. My mother was a concert level pianist. I play the piano, not even close to concert level. I can basically accompany myself and play a few little ditties from Beethoven and Chopin. But I sing. That's my main instrument. And my niece, she plays guitar and the harp and the piano. So she's quite musical. But my father then went on to, once he had spent about a decade at William Morris and then a few other boutique agencies, he opened the George Litto agency. And the reason he opened his own agency was so that no one could tell him he couldn't represent blacklisted writers because
Yep.
his first client was Waldo Salt, who was a blacklisted writer. And he had met Waldo in New York City while he was at William Morris, and Waldo was writing under the name Mel Davenport, which was his pen name. And George decided when he opened up his agency that he really wanted to represent Waldo. So a blacklisted client was his first client, which is, completely insane, but that's exactly how my dad rolled because he bucked the system. He just believed that these guys were the best writers in Hollywood and the House of Un-American Activities Committee had long disbanded and that the Constitution guaranteed us the right to be communists if we want to be communists. And so there shouldn't be this thing called a blacklist. Now you can argue that the marketplace can decide whether or not somebody works, but not based on their political beliefs, based on whether or not they can do the job. And yes, some of people's political beliefs infiltrates their writing, that is sure. But they were top writers in their field. Nobody had a problem with it until HUAC started saying blacklist, communist, socialist, red, commie, and put it into the studio's minds that they had to create a list.
Was that the guy that
Um,
was crapped on by the chickens in the documentary?
yes. Oh, yeah. So in the documentary, we couldn't get a mugshot for J. Parnell Thomas, who was the head of the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and he
You
ended
mean
up going to,
bullies? Bullies.
yes, yes, Committee of Bullies, correct.
Yep.
And he ended up going to prison, federal prison for extortion and fraud. Not surprising at all. And I couldn't get a mugshot because obviously it had been wiped from the internet. I mean, I even checked with the Smithsonian and everything. So I had the idea that instead of getting a mugshot, we did an animated mugshot with him in the sort of, cartoon prison garb with he had to tend the chicken coop, and I'll let you see the documentary so you get the joke. But yes, the chickens do crap on his head, Monty Python style. So
Mm-hmm. Speaking
because
of
I figured he deserved it.
mm-hmm. Speaking of Waldo Salt.
That's it. Midnight Cowboy.
Yep.
That is the movie that my father got Waldo, and he got him the job to write write Midnight Cowboy, and that relaunched his career with movies under his own name and for reasonable fees. And then, he won the Academy Award for that. He wrote Coming Home. He won the Academy Award for that. And I'd like to point out to Sundance, if you're listening, I've applied to your festival. You give out the Waldo Salt Screenwriting Award. There would be no Waldo Salt Screenwriting Award if there were no George Litto behind Waldo Salt.
I
Because my
agree.
father rescued his career not just by getting him jobs. I mean, he lent them money. He lent his clients money. He kept them alive, and he gave them their dignity back, not just their careers. He gave them back their dignity. And that is not what agents do. Not then and not now, certainly not now. And I think, the establishment needs to applaud that because it took an enormous amount of courage for him to stand up to the studio heads. The FBI used to come to our house regularly and ask my father if he was a communist. And he used to say, I sell the scripts, I get 10%. It's called capitalism. Now get the fuck out. But, that took some courage too. And I think, today, especially when they're banning books again, they're saying don't say gay. They're taking away women's rights. The slow creep of fascism from that,
Oh,
very far
today
right
is
undercurrent
bad.
is coming back. And media and entertainment has a unique ability to tell stories and to ask the audience to follow a protagonist through a certain journey. And by following that protagonist through that journey, whether it's Joe Buck in Midnight Cowboy or Ratso Rizzo, or it's Jodie Foster in The Accused, or it's Denzel Washington in Malcolm X, we have a chance to learn something about society and maybe change some hearts and minds, because we're never going to change the establishment that wants to hold on to power. But we still have a democratic country. I hope we continue to have one. But we can change the hearts and minds of the people, the masses of the people. And there's more of us than there are of them.
Yep.
And so I made this documentary to inspire other filmmakers to have the courage of George Litto. They say, may the force be with you. I say amongst my friends who knew my father, whenever they have something they have to do that requires them just kind of screw up their courage and deal with it, I say, may the George be with you.
Yeah.
And I mean it, because I know he's with me all the time. And I am very grateful that I grew up with a father who taught me to believe in the content of people's character over the color of their skin, their religious creed, their sexual orientation. I mean, hell, I had when I was 8 years old, my babysitter was an open lesbian. And my parents,
as opposed to a closed lesbian.
as opposed to a closeted one that nobody knew about. Yes, no, she was absolutely
I'm
open
not
about
doing
it
a
to my.
play on words.
Yeah, no, but seriously, as opposed to not telling my parents, and we were told as children. My sister was like 4.5 and I was 8, and we were just told that sometimes boys like boys and sometimes boys like girls and sometimes girls like boys and sometimes girls like girls, and everybody should be free to love whoever they want to love, because that's what a free country should allow you to do. But we were also told that not everyone agrees with that, so it is. I didn't understand that kind of prejudice really existed until I was old enough to hear it for myself and see it for myself. But you know, um, my household, nobody was treated differently because of their immigration status, their color of their skin, their religious, persuasion. Although I would say almost no one we dealt with was terribly religious. Everybody was, you know, kind of your thing, you deal with it. But my parents' best friends were Jews. They were from Israel. And my dad's roommate, it was my dad's roommate actually, who was his best friend, who went back in '67 and fought in the 6 Day War. And I think he got there on the last day too, which is kind of a funny story, but that's another story altogether.
Well,
um, but yeah.
I've interviewed. She just passed away within the last couple of years, but I've interviewed Tina Scala, who was in
Hmm.
Midnight Cowboy. She talked a lot about her sister, but of course she was in the scene in the laundry scene as a pregnant woman when
Right.
yeah. So I have interviewed one person from this movie. I got a few other movies here I want to highlight, including three copies.
Of,
One of my all-time favorites.
I know, Dress to Kill.
I got
Well,
that.
Dress to Kill is the first film to feature a trans lead. I did my research. It is the first major studio release picture in the theaters to feature a trans lead. And I've also found out that the trans community in Los Angeles has a special party called A Night of a Thousand Bobbies, in which they dress up for in all the characters of Dress to Kill as Liz and as Bobby. It's fabulous.
The Criterion edition.
That's great. I love the Criterion edition.
And 4K.
The 4K restoration. Yeah, I had heard about that when that was coming out. I was really excited.
Yeah, I found that by accident. That was a must. You know you like a movie when you have three copies of it.
Well, Dress to Kill, my father produced several films and he also put together, he packaged as an agent, but in those days they didn't call it that. But it was like producing and you just didn't get credit. Um, Several movies. But I know that Dress to Kill was one of the films he was incredibly proud of because of the fact that it was so trailblazing. That and of course Over the Edge, because it was about young,
I got
white,
blow
middle
up.
class. Yeah, Blowout's great.
Yeah,
Young middle class males in a suburban community who feel that their voices aren't being heard and they get so upset that they lock all the parents in the school and set the school on fire.
hmm
Uh, and it was shot about 20 minutes away from Columbine, which is, very prescient on his part, maybe a little too prescient, and to be willing to make that film. And I still feel like that film, if you take out the '70s expressions of like far out and replace them with, what they say today, the script holds up, the story holds up, and I am grateful to be part of that legacy.
yeah. Well, I don't have Obsession here, but I've had Lorraine Dupree on here from that film, and I remember I had her on. I started doing Zoom after the lockdown, and when I had her on, I guess um, she just had her shots and whatnot, and she and her husband were watching Shaun the Sheep. That's one of the things I remember about her. They're watching Shaun the Sheep.
That's
I had
funny.
her. I had
That
her
is
on
funny.
from but Dressed to Kill after having you on in tribute to your dad,
Hmm.
and of course having Brandon Maggart on, who was also appears in this, and he was in
Hmm.
Christmas Evil. I was very lucky I've been able to get Nancy Allen on here.
Well, I had a little to do with that.
Did ya?
Well, I wrote her an email and
You
I
know
told her
what?
that she should.
Well, you know what? I didn't know who I because I know Brandon did, and I didn't know you wrote her an email, but I made a donation to We Spark as well because I was
Well, that
familiar.
probably helped.
Well, I got her on here. She had the best reaction to my cat Skittles during the Zoom. She was like, "I just want to take his face and miss him."
Oh, she loves animals. She absolutely loves animals.
Yeah.
Nancy was one of the sweetest people. I mean, I had to interview several people for the documentary, and Nancy gave me one of the great interviews that I have. In fact, the hardest part for me was cutting her interview because so much of it was so good. And
Oh,
she really
jeepers. If we can sit
she,
through 3 hours of something as boring as Titanic, we can sit through 3 hours of Nancy talking about George.
I had about 3.5 hours of interview,
You know
and
how
I cut
long
it
she was
down.
on here?
No,
I had her on here for 2 hours. And
wow.
believe me, I'd love to get her back on because I know there's some films we didn't touch on. But I'm going to see. But I'd love to get her back on. But I'm going to tell you, you wrote her that email. Thank you so much because she was a bucket list interview for me. And
Thank
we
you.
must have spent an hour out of that 2 hours just talking Dress to Kill. And she heard something from me she never heard before. And she
What's that?
laughed. I said, Nancy, I know you appear plaidly dressed in that movie. And no question, she's a sexy woman. But I said, you did two things in that movie that turned me on. And that was not one of them. And goes, what? What? Okay. Oh, she goes, okay. And I said, number one, I could watch all day that scene where you're running through the subway and you hoist yourself over the subway bar and
Oh
up
yeah, that was
over.
pretty good.
I I
She
said
jumped
I
the turnstiles. Yeah.
I said, Nancy, I love that. I get tingly every time I see that. And I said, but the other thing, and I said, this is one of the sexiest things I ever seen. And she'd never heard this before. Said, when Dennis France looks at you and he says, who are you fucking? And I said, Nancy, and you look at him and that look on your face, and she goes, fuck you. I said, Nancy, I'm sorry, I'm totally turned on. And she just broke out laughing. I said, have you ever heard that before? And she said, no.
Probably not, but yes, that would make her laugh. She told me a story about her and my father well, Brian was prepping Obsession,
Hmm.
and she had just finished Carrie.
Hmm.
And my father went to dinner with Brian and Amy Irving and Nancy. And during the dinner, she and my father got to talking. And originally, she was a little offended by this comment. And I'll tell you what he said. He said, she's pretty, but you're interesting. And what she realized was he wasn't saying she wasn't pretty. He was saying she's just pretty. You're interesting. And at some point, he also said, you're going to have the more interesting career. Just you watch. And he was right. And I'm not saying he was saying anything negative about Amy Irving. He was just making sort of an agent's assessment of what he saw as the trajectory of their careers. Because Nancy's, though she was very beautiful, was very interesting.
Yep.
When she, like, I remember in Blowout, when she's talking with John Travolta and she's talking about the no makeup look. And he said, well, I like to see the makeup look. And she says, well, I only do that for special occasions. And she does this little eye bat. It's so perfect because you read everything inside of her saying, God, I'm falling in love with this man. And she did it with a blink of an eye, literally, you know?
I always have
And
a
that,
hard time with her voice in that movie.
well, that was, a decision that I think she and Brian came to. I don't know why, but, whatever it is, maybe they wanted her to feel or seem more vulnerable. But
Well, I got the movie here, so it doesn't deter me too much. But for me, when I think of Nancy Allen, it's always Dressed to Kill, and I absolutely love her in that movie. And like I said, I got 3 copies of that. I didn't have the 4K whenever I'd interviewed her, so
well,
but
it only just came out in the last couple of years, I think.
yeah. Yeah, she did like
So,
the Carrie shirt I had on that was done by Twisted Teazo, and you know, I love Nancy. So I say thank you for that email. I appreciate that so much. She was a bucket list interview for me.
Well, I'm glad it helped. And, I also think, again, the film fans out there that listen to your show,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we all, we don't exist as filmmakers and as actors without them. So it's important to, remember that, we have to also spend the time to not just promote the projects we're working out, but revisit the old projects that, that they still love. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I own the foreign rights in my dad's company that I control and take care of to Obsession Over the Edge. And I also sell That Cold Day in the Park by Robert Altman, which is
Mm-hmm.
his homage to Hitchcock. And you'd be amazed how these movies that are 45 and 50 years old, how well I mean, what I sell them for. I'm literally just finishing up a settlement with Universal Music because they uh, made some errors in paying me on the Obsession soundtrack. I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I I'm amazed that there's such a demand for the soundtrack of a 50-year-old movie. I mean, it'll be 50 years old in 2026. And by the way, the 4K is coming out. I have spoken to Sony about it, and they plan to do a big 50th anniversary 4K release. So look
For
out for that
Obsession?
for Obsession in
Yeah, I
2026.
I haven't got that yet. I gotta get that one. I like Genevieve Bujold. I'm gonna screw her name up.
Geneviève Bujold.
I know I was gonna screw that up. I really liked her in it, but
And she's a nice lady too. She
and
and my dad were good friends.
I loved hearing the story about John Lithgow and that how he got casted too.
It was really, I mean, they were, going through tons and tons of actors. My father kept saying no, 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 no until they finally got to Lithgow, and then he said yes, absolutely yes.
Yeah.
And then a funny little anecdote: 25 years later, something like that, John Lithgow was going to do something with New York City Ballet, and he decided he wanted to take a couple of ballet classes to, I guess get familiar with ballerinas and ballet dancers. And so I took from a
I think he was getting prepared for Harry and the Hendersons.
something like that. No, he was playing an elephant in some show for the New York City Ballet. And so my teacher was a very famous Bolshoi ballet dancer who was famous around town named Alla Khaniashvili. And I took from this woman. And so John Lithgow comes in and Alla says, "Oh, Mr. Lithgow, just stand behind Andrea. You know, she will show you what to do." And I had just come back from Italy, and I had been talking to one of the pupils, and I said, "Oh, I just got back from Italy. I'm a little jet lagged." And he said, "Oh, I did my first movie in Italy. My first real job as an actor was I got to shoot in Florence, Italy." And I said, "Oh, really?" Like I didn't know. And I said, "Did you have a great time?" And he said, "Oh, I had a great time." I said, "Did they pay you well?" He said, "I don't know. I remember it felt like too much money at the time." And I said, "What movie is it?" And he said, "Oh, you probably never heard of it." And I said, "Try me." And he said, "Obsession. You ever heard of that movie?" And I said, "Yes, because my name is Andria Litto. I'm George's daughter." And he nearly fell over. He's like, "Are you kidding? You're George's daughter? Of all the ballet classes in all the towns of all the world, I had to walk into yours." A little Casablanca ripoff.
Yep.
And we had a good little giggle. And I gave him my dad's number, and he called George, and they had a good little giggle about it. But Lithgow, he was always a class act. We'd run into him every once in a while around town, and "Hi, George, how you doing?" Always great, and you gotta appreciate that.
Well, let's talk some about the documentary because I'm going to tell you, I watched that when I got back from work, and I usually do the overnight, and I was like, I've got to watch this before I have you on here. Plus, it shows respect. But I'm going to tell you, I could not believe how engrossed I was in it. Number one, the opening really grabbed me
Thank you.
because talking about bulldozing. And there's this section in the opening where he's living in a house with his family, I guess you guys, and
Well, I
he
wasn't
wants
there yet. I wasn't born yet. He wanted a
oh
pool.
wanted a pool, and he was told he'd have to move the mountain, and by golly, he did.
Yes, he did.
And that really sums up your dad.
It does. That's why I opened with that story. By the way, the documentary is called "My Father Moves Mountains,"
Mm-hmm.
and the little subheading is "How George Litto Bulldozed the Hollywood Blacklist." And George Litto, my father, moved an actual mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was too much of a stretch for him to get blacklisted writers their jobs and their lives back, because that just required moving mountains metaphorically. He had
Mm-hmm.
actually already done it physically. Because
Yep.
in the 60s, moving a mountain was quite the engineering feat. It was not something you could just take lightly. You can just now they can just carve it out and put big retaining walls and steel rods in the ground. It's not as big a deal. But back then, it was really quite an insane thing to do. And this is Los Angeles, earthquake central. Hello. So it had to be up to code and all this thing, and it ended up costing more than the house. That is absolutely for sure. But he loved the house and he loved living there. So he built the pool. And it did actually raise the value of the house and it ended up working out. But that is just quintessential my father because he didn't see it as an insurmountable obstacle. It was just in his way.
I wish
Like,
I had more of that mindset myself. I found that so inspiring when I saw that clip.
thank you. And I try to live that way too. Somebody tells me no or it can't be done or this isn't going to happen. I just say, okay, says you. you know, we'll see about that. And I just keep going forward. And what my dad taught me about that is my dad had this incredible pragmatic optimism. I'm fully aware that's an oxymoron, by the way. But he was both pragmatic, he was aware of the realities,
Mm-hmm.
while also being optimistic enough to believe that somehow he could supersede some of them, not all of them. He wasn't delusional. But if there was a way for it to get done, he was going to get it done. And that was it. So he felt that Dalton Trumbo had already broken through with Spartacus with Kirk Douglas and
Yep.
Ingo Preminger, or Otto Preminger, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was very doable to break through again. But what my father wanted to do was break through systematically because he didn't, because even Dalton came to him because he was out of money and was still finding it hard to get a job after Spartacus because there were still few and far between people who were really willing to buck the blacklist and buck the studios and stand up and say, you know what, this is done, we're done with this, we're moving on. So he started with Waldo and then Michael Wilson became his client, and then after Michael Wilson came Abe Polonsky and Ring Lardner Jr. So he made he got Midnight Cowboy together with Waldo. He put Ring Lardner Jr. and his client, the inimitable anarchist Robert Altman, as the director on MASH.
I
Michael
gotta
Wilson.
say, I had a huge laugh over the meatball section. Talking about Robert Altman, and your father had 6 of them.
6 pot laced meatballs. Yes. He
He
said he
did.
didn't remember anything for 3 days.
I had a big laugh. I didn't know all this stuff about Robert Altman, although I did know MASH was the first film to contain the F word.
Mm-hmm.
That I did know.
It was.
Yep.
And he managed to sneak it by the censors.
Hmm.
But Michael Wilson, he got Michael Wilson Planet of the Apes because the novel was written by Pierre Boulle. And when they were trying to find one of George's other clients who were not blacklisted to write the script from the Pierre Boulle novel, he kept saying, well, why don't we just get the guy who wrote the last Pierre Boulle novel, a guy named Michael Wilson? They're like, isn't he blacklisted? He's like, yeah, who cares? You know? And
Hmm.
and it took somebody to stand up first. Kirk Douglas stood up,
Yep.
and Otto Preminger, I give them full props, but the blacklist was not over. It's just, that moment they made an exception and they let it slide. But it wasn't over. It wasn't over until Waldo and Michael Wilson and Rignarder Jr. and Abram Polonsky and Paul Jericho and Arnold Pearl and Ian Hunt here, they all went back to work. And there was no question anymore. And that happened because of my father. Because he was the only one who had that many blacklisted clients and who was systematically ignoring the blacklist and saying, this is not happening anymore. These are the best writers in Hollywood. And if you want them, you have to hire them under their own names and you have to pay them. End of story. And he also used to say, you want my other clients? You got to hire these guys. And then it got so popular for the blacklisted writers to be blacklisted because then now they were winning all these Oscars and getting all these nominations that his other clients started pretending they were blacklisted writers. It became like a vogue. Go figure, right? So my dad used to joke that he represented 17 of the Hollywood 10 because all of his clients pretended they were blacklisted after a point, or they would sort of say, I used to be a blacklisted writer. I mean, I'm not sure the blacklisted writers appreciated that because they didn't suffer the indignities that they did. But one of the things that's important to me in the film is we talk about Abe Polonsky. Mm-hmm. Abe Polonsky, who wrote Blacklist, Body and Soul, and The Force of Evil, which is, by the way, one of Scorsese's favorite films. He just restored it and re-released it. Abe was my godfather, which as an Italian Catholic is sort of kind of taboo. You're not supposed to do that because he was Russian Jewish, right? But my parents just lied to the priest and said he was Polish Catholic. Because again, content of your character, right? They figured if God was really an all-loving, all-knowing God, it wouldn't matter. They bought into that. They didn't buy into the rest of the man-made stuff. So I had this extraordinary man as my godfather and my friend. I mean, a mentor and a friend. He read me Shakespeare when I was young. We would talk about, movies and books, and he would often tell me what plays and things I should be reading. He told me if I wanted to be a good artist of any sort, but especially a writer, I needed to read. I needed to read all the greats. I needed to live because you need to have something to write about. And I needed to practice writing every day, whether it's in my journal or just writing poetry or just doing something, because it's all a muscle. It's like dancers go to the bar and they plie every day. Singers do vocal exercises. Writers need to write. And I took that to heart. But one of the really amazing things about Abe is that he was not bitter. He was angry about Kazan. He really did not feel that Kazan, because Kazan named him.
Yeah.
He felt that Kazan had no repercussions for what he had done. But he was not bitter in general. He was not a bitter person. He was not somebody who took what happened to him and came out as an angry person. He was a gregarious person. He was loving. He was warm. And he also explained to me that, sometimes you suffer a little bit to stand up for the right things. Making the right choice in life doesn't always mean you get to be a hero or be viewed as a hero. Maybe you're viewed as a hero long after you're dead. You don't do it for the heroism. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And because you have to sleep with yourself. You have to be okay with your conscience and what you did. And he was absolutely okay with what he did. The fact that his wife was really good in the stock market and kept them afloat financially, they were by no means rich during that period, but he fared better than some of the others who were really struggling because of, I think, of his wife's acumen. And then he escaped to France during the blacklist because he had been a hero during World War II. He was a member of the French underground in the OSS, and he had worked with de Gaulle, and he was considered a hero in Paris, in France. So he went over there for a while and wrote under assumed names and helped other people on scripts. And he never, ever, ever revealed what scripts he worked on or worked under, helped other people that fronted for him. He always was incredibly discreet about that. He said, no, we made an agreement. And even though things are different now, and that was his choice too. I'm not changing that. I'm not taking away that person's credit, or that they did me a favor at the time that I needed. And I thought that was incredibly honorable. Not that people shouldn't get credit for what they did. I'm not arguing that at all. But that was his choice. And I understood his choice, because he felt that it was a terrible time and everybody who was involved got hurt, and he didn't need to hurt anybody else as a result. And that was truly not that, and again, I'm not saying taking away credit is hurt. It was just his choice and how he wanted to live. And having somebody that had two men in my life, my father and Abe, who had so much integrity and so much of a moral compass about right and wrong, an ethical understanding. It had nothing to do with religion. It had everything to do with humanity, just being a freaking human being and being a respectful, empathetic, considerate human being. To me, I feel like growing up in Hollywood, where that is not only rare, it's rare in the rest of the world these days. I'm incredibly lucky. And I'm aiming, not just with this documentary, to try to change the hearts and minds of people. But I hope to be able to make more movies that, like Dress to Kill or Over the Edge, that cause us to believe or think about what we believe, challenge our belief systems, and take a journey with characters that take us on an incredible ride, that at the end we maybe go, maybe I need to rethink this. Maybe I need to care about this subject. Maybe I wasn't even aware of this subject. And I believe movies, they don't have to do that, movies and television. They can be purely entertaining too. That's great. I'm all for that as well. But I also think we have an opportunity. And when we have that opportunity, we should use it wisely.
I agree. One of the things that really you mentioned, Kazan. I remember when he got the honorary Oscar. Terrific filmmaker on the waterfront, Streetcar Named Desire. I mean, terrific filmmaker. But I remember that night at the Oscar where he got the honorary Oscar, and some
Well,
people were clapping and some people weren't. I remember that.
well, he got the Thalberg, which is a Lifetime Achievement Award. And what the people who were on the side of the blacklist, who did not clap, who stayed in their seats, and the people who protested felt is that the Thalberg is a Lifetime Achievement Award. Nobody argues that Kazan wasn't a great director. He was a great director, and he won many accolades for his individual films. But to laud his body of work means you're also lauding the fact that much of his body of work was on the back of the blacklisted people who he named. And are you condoning that then? Are you condoning a rat? Are you condoning somebody who, and yes, maybe the Academy made a mistake. I think that also who was in charge at the time, they were people who were grateful to Kazan for their careers. So that's why they chose to do that. And so they had a different point of view. But that point of view was very personal.
Mm-hmm.
From a global perspective, from a complete picture of the business perspective, the Hollywood industry, is it right to give a Lifetime Achievement Award to somebody who a majority of their lifetime achievement came on the backs of people who they named, and in knowing that naming them would end their careers?
Yep.
That's a really big question that the Academy should have asked itself. And while we're on the subject of the Academy, I'm just putting it out there, guys. George Litto ought to get the Humanitarian Award, because I can't think of anything more humanitarian than working to give people their lives and their dignity back.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
I really feel that they ought to consider that, especially when we're talking about times of censorship coming back. We ought to be lauding the people who stood up for artists' rights to free speech and for artists' rights to be or say or think what they feel. I mean, this cancel culture on either side of the fence, I'm not thrilled about. I
Nope.
am not thrilled from the. I'm going to stand up and say that I'm very center left.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am not so left that I am offended by every comment. I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also, but I also feel that we ought to be sensitive to everybody's, race, creed, color. I'm not a fan of jokes that are derogatory to any one particular stereotype or group. I think there are lots of ways to be funny, and you don't have to do that. That said, there are some stereotypes that are funny but not derogatory. So that's where I think the left goes too far. That said, again, this is a time where our business is concerned about censorship. Even with AI, we have to worry about if AI takes over and your image and your voice and your words are controlled by a corporation, then where does our artistic speech go? So we should be standing up and championing the people in the past and our present who are standing up for our rights as artists to continue to have a free discourse. It is, after all, the First Amendment. And that's why it was the First Amendment and not the 10th. The
It's
founding fathers
interesting.
knew what they were doing.
It's interesting you say that too, because like I started putting my stuff on Spotify. I'm gonna start putting on Rumble and locals because on YouTube, one of my interviews got got a strike against my channel because of inappropriate talk about health, had to do with the pandemic. And all it was me and the guests where I'm here and they're in the States. I just asked what was the pandemic like where you are, and we just had a conversation about
Yeah,
that. And I'm
because
like, are you
algorithms are making decisions, not people.
exactly? And my response to that, if this is how you're going to do this, I'll I'll bide my time until my channel ends up getting pulled because of this crap. And I've learned through other channels, well, there's Spotify, there's Rumble, there's locals, there's other opportunities. And what's going to happen is YouTube will end up crumbling as a result of stuff like this because I listened to
They
that
may or
interview
may
and there's
not. They may or may not, because I've seen stuff on YouTube that is far worse and they
I
let it
have
slide.
too. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I heard that even when that got pulled, and it's like, well, it'll go up on Spotify. That's fine. But I get
Well, that's called the
tired of
free
the
market.
yeah, I get tired of the bullying,
Mm-hmm.
and we got up in politics, when I hear about the whole thing that happened in Canada here with the trucker situation and bank accounts getting froze.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like a dictatorship. That's scary for here in Canada.
Well, it's scary everywhere because workers have the right to stand up for their rights. I mean, that's the whole
Hmm.
point of collective bargaining and unions. And getting back to that, one of the reasons the blacklist was initiated was because the writers union, the screenwriters, wanted a union of their own, and they were trying to collectively bargain. The WGA was originally called the Screenwriters Union, and they were trying to force collective bargaining and have rights over how credit was accorded so that the studios couldn't just bring some writer in, have them write one sentence and give them credit.
Yeah.
And they were labeled subversive, because they wanted a 40-hour work week to be a law of the land. They wanted safety hazards. There was no OSHA. They wanted child labor laws, an end to Jim Crow laws, equal rights for women. My God, this is so incredibly subversive. Meanwhile, the KKK was running around the South lynching people, but that was fine.
Yep.
And an entire population swallowed all of that and bought into it. They bought into the people that were dangerous were guys who couldn't even overthrow their agent, let alone the country. And my dad used to joke he knew that for a fact because he was their agent, right? Instead of the people running around in white sheets who were so cowardly they couldn't even show their faces. They ran around in white sheets and hung people on trees because they looked at a white woman.
Wow.
I mean, I think we have to have that conversation. And we have to keep having it, because one of the mistakes that liberals make in general, and we make few, is that when we win a battle for rights, whether it's civil rights or women's rights or abortion rights or LGBTQ rights, we sit down. We go, oh, we did that. Okay, and we focus on the next problem. Meanwhile, the other side that's not so happy about that, they don't see it as a battle. They see it as a war. And that's why they call it the war on Christmas, the war on white people, the war on straight people. Have you ever noticed that that's their rhetoric? Because they see it as a war. It's not just a battle that needs to be won and then the next thing. You know, there's a reason that Lucas was so brilliant in Star Wars, and that one Star Wars ends with the Force winning and the other one wins with the dark side winning, and then the next one's the Force and then the dark side, and so on and so forth, because that's life. Because the two forces, and I'm not saying, by the way, that everyone who's conservative is the dark side, so I don't want that to get misconstrued. You know, I have plenty of friends, by the way, who are moderate Republicans. And I think moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats have a lot more in common than they have, you know, not in common.
Mm-hmm.
And we ought to be spending more time talking about what we have in common and how we need to move the country forward, whether it's America or Canada or any other country, than we do talking about our differences, because we can resolve our differences by just finding common ground on the things we have common ground about, because sometimes those differences just go away on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the people who divide us, who would divide us, they're dividing and conquering. They create division so that you're looking over there while they're stealing your money over here.
Yep. Yep.
Right? And they get you to vote against your own economic interest, even your own social interest, because of this, you know, boogeyman over here. Fear and anger is a great way to control a population if you want to get them to go against their own interest. You know, my dad used to say any decision made out of fear or anger is a bad one. And that goes doubly for how you view politics. The minute you find yourself getting really worked up about an issue, you should start asking yourself, why am I upset? Am I upset because they're telling me to be upset? How does this actually affect me? Does it affect me at all? Does it affect me at all if there's a trans person in the ladies' room when I go into my own unique stall? No. I may not want to see it. I mean, I personally don't care. I think it's fine. I live in Los Angeles, right near West Hollywood. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't even bat an eyelash, you know? But to some people, they may find it difficult to deal with. And that's their right to feel that way. But it is not necessarily, laws shouldn't be made so that people can feel comfortable. You know, comfort isn't part of the law. The law should be made so that everybody can have their own individual, in a democracy, can have their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, their own individual freedoms, the right to live unfettered. And so again, getting back to the blacklist, if you are an artist and you are promoting those causes, which they were, and then you are now silenced for promoting those causes. Meanwhile, there are people, you know, south on the Mason-Dixon line killing people for much less. Then the question is, are those people really the people you should be afraid of, those blacklisted people that have been silenced? Or do they just want you to look over there so that they can get away with whatever it is they're doing over here?
Yeah.
And And I gave my dad enormous credit for being an Italian American, first generation. He's an immigrant son. You know, he went to college. He grew up in an Italian neighborhood. You know, if you listen to my dad's interviews, he talks like Rocky. You know, he's got that Southern Italian, South Philly,
Let's not
you
forget
know.
the laugh.
Oh, and the laugh. He's the greatest laugh on earth. He was like this volcanic, laugh. It was so infectious. But here's this kid who came out of, the old neighborhood, so to speak. And he literally, the American dream, pulled himself up by his bootstraps. And the moment he had a little bit of success and a little bit of a platform to start his own agency, he didn't start his own agency and just represent commercially viable writers and directors. He took that platform and he represented blacklisted writers, not just because he thought they were the best writers in Hollywood, but because he believed they had a right to work. And they were great writers. And he was going to go out and prove it. And the proof is that hardly anyone ever talked about it again in the late 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It just disappeared from the landscape like it never happened. And that's why so many people in this industry, even people my father's generation, when I show them this film, they go, wow, I didn't even, I thought I knew stuff about the blacklist, but I didn't know so much of what you told me. And that's actually to my father's credit, because he made it go away. And so I'm saying now, this kind of stuff is coming back. So we need more George Littos.
Yeah, we do.
To stand up and to stand up for, I don't have to like everything people say. I mean, there are plenty of Republicans in this business who say things I don't like, I don't agree with, but I don't believe they should be canceled.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I understand if a studio is promoting a film and an actor says something that's offensive to people, that's the marketplace dictating things, but they shouldn't be canceled from never working again. I would understand that a studio would be concerned about whether or not they're smart enough to, know how to promote the movie and not get themselves into trouble. But again, that's the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't think they should be canceled. Should somebody be canceled for being a serial rapist like Harvey Weinstein? Absolutely. I mean, they've committed a crime now. And they didn't just commit one crime against one person. They committed multiple crimes against multiple people and harmed, possibly irreparably, many, many women. Because we know about the women who came forward. What we don't know is about the women who didn't come forward. Because I'm sure there are plenty of them. And I mean, I met Harvey, and when I was young and very attractive, and the type he would go for. And the minute he found out I was George Litto's daughter, he just turned on his heels and ran, because he knew better. And I maintain that maybe Brad Pitt had something to do with Gwyneth Paltrow, getting away from Harvey's clutches.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it had more to do with the fact that Steven Spielberg was her godfather.
Oh, I didn't know that. I knew that he was godfather to Drew Barrymore. I didn't know Gwyneth Paltrow.
I believe he is her godfather. And they are
Wow.
best friends. Kate Capshaw and Gwyneth's mother. Kate Capshaw is Steven's mother. I mean, Steven's wife. And Gwyneth's mother are best friends.
Oh, okay.
So, I'm sure she had what I like to call Hollywood leverage. And when you got Hollywood leverage, they treat you differently. They treat you differently because they know better. I'm sure I sort of got through this business fairly unscathed. I had a few little, swipes with some scumbags, but nothing very serious. And I'm sure it's because of my father being my father. Because I know if Harvey had laid a hand on me, my father would have taken his lungs out with a spoon and enjoyed it.
Yeah, Harvey, what a nightmare that guy was.
Well, the guys who work at Dimension Films, used to refer to him as Jabba the Hutt. And they referred to Bob Weinstein as Salacious B. Crumb, you know, the little dog that sat next to Jabba and laughed at every horrible thing
Oh
he did.
yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yep.
Mhm. I'm wondering now if they knew more.
I bet you they knew that. I bet you they knew more than they're letting on.
I'm sure, because
Yep.
that nickname had some very serious implications to it. You
Yep.
know, those nicknames. Um,
Yep.
but but also, I mean, let's say one of those junior executives said something. I doubt anyone would have done anything about it at the time.
Probably not.
So, sometimes uh, your courage can get you into trouble, and that's okay. That is okay. Again, you have to be the one who's comfortable with you in the morning. I mean, I've been well known to tell studios exactly what I think, and sometimes that landed well, sometimes it didn't. But I'm still here,
Yep.
right?
I was
And
good.
and
I was good.
George, was
Yeah.
infamous for that.
I think that is I think that's good. You know what? Me tell you what I was thinking of watching this documentary because
Tell me.
this is going to get very personal, but I'm going to tell you. I was reminded a lot about my dad. My
That's
father
nice.
worked at the telephone company here for 30 years, and he was very much a workaholic. But and he was a member of the church here. You know, we grew up in a Christian household. But my dad lived it. You know, when they talk about Christ-like, I can't think of anybody in my mind that lived it like my dad. My dad was one of these people.
Good for him.
Yeah, he'd get up at 3 in the morning to snowplow people's uh, driveways out in the wintertime, and he never asked for a cent. It was just something he had a plow, he was able to do it. He'd be up and he would do it, you know? And I think it was just in his genes that he would do that because my grandfather was also workaholic, you know. When my dad retired from the telephone company, he took over our spring water plant business that my grandfather ran. My grandfather was supposed to retire, still showed up there every day, but my dad was retired, but yet running that business. And dad was fair to everybody, you know. When
That is because he had a sense of purpose of who he was. He really knew who he was, and that's one thing I can
Mhm.
also say about that your father and my father have in common. That they knew who they were and who they wanted to be.
when
And
the
that's how they
trans
made their decisions.
yeah, well, when the transport truck would come up here and bring coolers for the water bottles there to sell, dad would always bring a case of 24 or 500 milliliter bottles out and just give it to the driver, you know, on his trip back. It was just something my dad did, and it always landed on me.
He showed appreciation for the people who worked for him. And I
Yep.
think it probably inspired some loyalty too as a result.
Well, you said something in this documentary that made me think about something because I lost my dad passed away in April of last year after
Sorry.
8 years of ALS. And my dad's attitude was this. Um, he wanted to be cremated when he died. He said he didn't want a funeral. He said if anybody wanted to see him, he's here now. I was amazed at how many people that he had helped in the past never came around. That stood out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you had mentioned about your dad that you know you had that phone conversation where he said he was proud of you and whatnot.
Well, that was my sister.
Okay, your sister. But you had a conversation like that before he passed, right?
Yes, about a few hours before he passed, he called me to tell me he loved me.
exactly. Here's where that reminds me of my situation. My younger brother took care of my folks during this time. He was their caregiver. Mom had Parkinson's and dad had ALS. And dad did everything he could to help us right up to the very end. But I remember before dad passed in April of 2022, I was working at the time, working at the hospital as a housekeeper, and my brother would text me. He says, "You better go see dad. He doesn't have much time." That first text, I got so overwhelmed and busy, I didn't take heed to it. Second time, he texted me the same thing about a week later. And I knew I had a lot on my plate and they lived out of town, but I was like, you know what? I better go out. It was the morning of April 4th, 2022. I went and saw my dad, and he had a finger twitching a little bit, and a little bit of eye movement. He couldn't communicate, but I got to sit down and I got to say my piece. And I got to tell dad all the things I had saw from my perspective, from my recollection. And I told him that I was so proud to have him as a dad. And I said, when I think of Christianity, true Christianity, being Christ-like, I said, I learned so much of that from my dad. And I told my dad that I loved him. And, I had breakfast with mom and I went to work that night. When I got done my shift at work, I turned my phone on. There was about 5 messages from my brother telling me to answer the phone. And dad had passed away early, like about 2 in the morning or something like that of April 5th. And I'm going to tell you, I was so glad I went in that previous morning to see my father, you know, because you never know, you never know. And
I was able to spend the last 10 days of my father's life with him. We were
yeah,
together for 10 days. And then in the last day and a half, he was in the hospital
mhm,
because I had to rush him to the ER. So I understand that. And
yep,
um, it was very hard. It's very hard. And you're glad I am forever grateful that I spent that time. So I know how you feel.
because they lived out of town, so I didn't always get out there. So, but I'm glad I went that morning. And dad was so proud too that because I'm on my fourth vehicle, but I remember it was 2003. I got my first car. It was a Corolla. Dad went with me when we picked it up. You know, the next vehicle I got, like I had that Corolla, I think, for about 9 years,
Oh yeah, they're
and
taxi cabs.
yeah,
They last forever.
they last a long time. And when it got to the point where it didn't run, Mom passed the Intrepid down to me. That didn't last as long, but then after that, they passed the Nissan down to me. But the Nissan was the last one I got passed down, and I remember that right now I got a I got a Honda Civic right now, and the day I got it was when I got my second shot,
Hmm.
and I said to my supervisor actually went with me to get my the car I currently have because I think I was driving her to a site, and
Hmm.
she said, go to Jim Gilbert's to get your next car, blah, blah, blah. And she went with me and she said, you got your shot and you're going to work? And I said, yeah, I think it's because I don't have time to be sick. I got work to do. I gotta get my car. But anyway, because the Nissan was stalling on me. Anyway, I got my car, but I remember when I took it around to the house, um, Mom had told Dad that I had got a new car. Actually, it wasn't brand, it was used, but still. And I remember Dad, lifting himself out of the chair so he could look out the window to see the car, because he was happy that I did that for myself, and but my dad's in heaven, and I'm glad I had that time with him, but I did not realize how much of my dad rubbed off on me because my mom said something to me on our last phone conversation that I remember saying. She said, Greg, remember when you said that you were never going to work the way your father did, yet you were never going to work, work, work? He said, and here you are. You got screwed out of your job at the hospital, even though I got gaslit. But even though you didn't miss a single day of work, you worked overtime, you worked doubles, you worked holidays, and you worked in any unit. He said, here you are working at a cleaning company and you're not missing any days. He said that, remember you said you were never going to work like your father? He said, you're exactly like your father. And I kind of felt proud to hear that.
Absolutely. My mother calls me George 2.0.
Yeah.
Yeah. She said, you're George 2.0 in drag. You might as well just be the female version of your father. And, the next generation.
Yeah.
I'm
So
next gen George,
I
which
thought
I
about my
absolutely
dad.
love.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought about
I
my
love
dad
that.
watching your documentary because my dad would not have let these kind of people push him around either, Um,
Yeah, but
my
it's
dad
important
was,
to
yeah.
note that George was able to do what he did because he was sort of because the HUAC had already disbanded.
Hmm.
He would not have been able. I don't think he would have been able to have it be as effective if HUAC were still in effect. But the fact that the blacklist was still in effect was a travesty.
Hmm.
It should never have been there in the first place. It was absolutely a witch hunt, and in the truest of senses. That's why Arthur Miller wrote the Crucible, because the Crucible is actually an allegory for the blacklist.
Hmm.
And I'm sure my father would not have been able to do that if he had started 10 years earlier. But that said, one of the things I tried to do in the documentary was weave not just the story of my father's career and the blacklist and everything else, but tell the story of us without telling our story, all the time, but by me telling his story and being so integrally linked into the documentary. It's rare that a filmmaker is in her own or his own documentary. I mean, I can only think of one where the filmmaker is featured as much as I am. That's Supersize Me, because it was about, him. But, um, I couldn't think of anyone else to tell his story that could tell it the way I did. And also, that's why I financed it myself, because I wasn't going to let anyone tell me how to tell his story, because I'm as stubborn as he is.
I love
And
that
he put up
story.
his own money.
Yeah, I love that story your sister tells about the hug too.
Oh, yeah. Come here and give me a hug. Well, he had this very gruff voice. He'd talk like Rocky and he'd be like, Andria, get in here. And and you'd think if you didn't know him, you'd think he was angry. But I knew that angry had many more decibels than that. So I knew he wasn't angry. But my sister would always wonder if she was getting in trouble. So uh, just different personalities, I guess. But yeah, he was larger than life. But I think again, it's so important to have the courage of your convictions. It is so important to know who you are and who you want to be. And when you do, then you are capable of great acts of kindness and integrity and magnanimity. That's a big word. But your dad, I think he was able to be the person he was because he was very sure of the man he wanted to be.
Yeah.
So he wasn't expecting accolades. He wasn't expecting a response. He did what he did because he felt it was the right thing to do. And I think that is something it's always it's always been a rare commodity. I wouldn't say that it's somehow I'm not nostalgic. I don't think 50 years ago it was less rare or more rare. I I think it's always been rare. I
Hmm.
think it is much easier to be selfish and to ignore the world around you and not feel a member of your community and that you have any sort of responsibility, not just to the community where you live, like your dad's place, your dad's home. He felt responsibility to his community. My father felt responsibility in the community in which he worked, Hollywood. And therein is why both men in their own way, shown so brightly as the kinds of people that we should hope to emulate,
Hmm. I'm going
you
to tell
know?
you too, there was a lot of stuff about the blacklist I didn't know. Like I knew about Kirk Douglas coming out there and in defense of Trumbo, and because I saw the movie Trumbo, and I got a little bit of a past uh look at this, but I had no idea about the John Garfield stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I never knew that.
In fact, John Garfield was my father's favorite actor, as he
Hmm.
mentions in the doc, because he had seen Body and Soul, written by my godfather, Abe Polonsky, who was not my godfather then, because Body and Soul was made, when my dad was a teenager in
Hmm.
the 40s.
Hmm.
And that movie really inspired him because it's a Faustian bargain. It's a story
Hmm.
about a Faustian bargain. John Garfield character Charlie Davis, the boxer, has the chance to sell himself out to the devil. And in the end, when he has the chance to take the money and take a dive as the boxer, or stand up and fight because he knew all these people in the neighborhood had been betting on him. And if he took the dive, then he'd lose his integrity, but he also hurt all the people in his community. He stands up and he does the right thing. And I think that movie was incredibly inspiring to my father for a number of reasons, because it was about a guy from, Brooklyn, which was similar to South Philadelphia, because my father's brother was a Golden Glove champion. He was a boxer
Hmm.
and a Golden Glove champ. And because I think it appealed to my dad's sense of who he, as a teenager, aspired to be. That's how movies can inspire you. And I know that my father often felt that he could have made that Faustian bargain in the movie business. There were often times where people offered him a lot of money to do things he didn't feel were right. And he didn't. He often said to me, I could have made more money, a lot more money, if I made a lot more movies and I made more deals that I wasn't comfortable with, but I just couldn't do it. And I think that's incredibly brave. And
Hmm.
I'm not complaining because I grew up with plenty of privilege and plenty of opportunities. I'm not wealthy, you know, after
I'm
his
not
life.
wealthy. No.
I would say that I'm, decidedly upper middle class, but not super upper middle class. Like, I do well. I live in California. I live in a nice place, but I don't own it. I drive a decent car, but I'm not I'm not complaining. I got an excellent education. I had a really wonderful life. I get to take some vacations. I don't know what anybody can do. I mean, once you've made $50 million and you have a couple of houses and money in the bank to live for the rest of your life, what else do you need?
It's
Is
interesting
it
you say that
question?
because like my podcast isn't monetized. I do this because I enjoy it, which really I was so honored when you reached out to me for this, but just I got a regular job here. I got my car. Um, yeah, I'm definitely far from wealthy. Uh, my cat doesn't help though. Doesn't help with
Yeah,
the
they
rent.
cost money. We have a few of them too. My
I
fiance, who's an armorer in the entertainment industry and a bodyguard.
mm-hmm.
He's 6'6", so we're a hilarious couple because I'm 5'1". We're funny, and he's German. He has a little bit of a German accent. Um, so he doesn't make a ton of money. He's an armorer. He makes a decent living, right? And I don't care. I'm not here for the money. I'm here for the the person, the character. But we have 6 cats, and we often joke that we could have bought a house sooner if we decided to have only one. Because they keep us poor, they eat us out of house and home. I mean, we have more cat food in the cabinets than we have actual food.
You know what? I went to is that the Toronto Zoo, went to the a convention there, a horror film convention. But I went to the Toronto Zoo while I was there, and I discovered that I always tell my brother, it's because he watched my cat while I was gone. I said, remember, Skittles, my cat, is related to the King of Beast, the lion. I
That's
saw
right.
proof of it because I saw several of them in that lion's den, and not one of them was up. They were all laying on their side, asleep. I was like,
Exactly. We
Skittles!
see here. I'm gonna go get one of the mascots of the house so we can, for the cat freaks in the audience.
There you go.
Come here, boo boo. Come here. Say hi, Sophie.
That's a big kitty.
And she's not even the biggest. She's
Oh,
just,
wow.
oh, she's just, oh, come here. Get on the table. Say hi, Sophie. Show everyone your pretty face.
There you go.
Say hi, boo boo.
Boo
Hi.
Boo. Boo Boo, like
We
the
call her,
owl in Clash of the Titans.
exactly. Well, that's her nickname. We call her Sophie. She's Sophie, though.
Yeah?
Princess Sophie. And she is very, very sleepy right now, aren't you? It's her nap time.
Just a minute, I'll get Skittles. Just a minute.
Yeah. Sophie, say hi to everyone. You're like, Mom, it's your podcast. I'm not interested. Oh,
Skittles!
Skittles. So cute.
Yeah, Nancy Allen loved Skittles. Skittles is like, did Nancy Allen's bring treats? Skittles says, you're exploiting me. You're using me for hits. And I'm like, Kitty, you're staying
Yes.
here for free. You don't
Yeah.
even
Well,
clean.
one of my cats is named Frankie Sinatra. He's upstairs. I can tell he's not down here with me. His name is Frankie Sinatra because he's got big blue eyes, old blue eyes.
Yeah.
And he's a rag doll, but the Himalayan style rag doll.
Mm-hmm.
And he's so beautiful. He was supposed to be a show cat, but we didn't want to do that to him. So he has his own Instagram page, and he has like 8,000 followers.
Oh, wow.
It's hilarious. And he's an Instagram influencer. People call me and I get Instagram messages asking me if I will take pictures of Frankie on their various pet paraphernalia. And I said, Frankie, you got to start earning your keep around here. When you start getting me free cat food and free litter.
Yeah, Kittles is lazy. I know Nancy Allen likes cats.
She does. She likes
Yeah,
all animals, really. She likes
yeah,
cats and dogs.
yeah.
Well, I think people who have, empathetic hearts tend to like animals. We have here 6 cats
Mm-hmm.
because my fiance had 2 and I had 3. When we moved in together, it became 5. And then sometime during the pandemic, we ended up rescuing a 6th because we were like 5, 6, what the hell, you know? So we have an abundance of fur everywhere. I have those fur rollers everywhere to take
Mm-hmm.
off fur, and wearing black is like a hazard in this house because it doesn't stay black long. But because especially Sophie, Sophie kills us. But my dad loved animals, and in fact, I had another cat that was my dad kind of called his cat because I lived with my father towards the end of his life. I took care of him. I was the caregiver, and I took care of him. And he had become enamored with this gray cat I had
Mm-hmm.
that he had renamed because her real name was. I love to name my cats after famous people because I think it's funny. She was a Russian blue, so I named her Anastasia Romanov.
Mm-hmm.
And I would call her, the Russian nickname for Anastasia is Nastya. I would call her Nastya, and my dad hated this name. So he renamed her Cuckoo because she would kind of skid around the house like she was crazy. And I believe that animals and people are very linked. They were very attached, these two. And the day I buried my father, she died.
Wow. Well, my Skittles story, Skittles used to, my nephew used to have Skittles and used to have an Australian Shepherd. And my parents ended up having both of them. And when they moved out of my family home into my grandparents' old house because it had less stairs, they took the Australian Shepherd with them. They kind of bonded with it. But I remember Dad had Skittles stay with me. Now, he said he told me so I would have company, which I thought was cool, but also the fact that I'm more a cat person. But I've had people tell me because I've been trying to get moved to Toronto. I'd love to live in Toronto. Love Toronto. And and one of the big hang-ups I've had is finding a place that's pet friendly. And I've actually had people tell me, just get rid of the cat.
No, of
And
course not.
I'm like, no, and not only that, Skittles was I mean, Dad and Mom were taking care of Skittles, but Dad gave Skittles to me. I can't
Yeah,
Skittles. Yeah,
I get that.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
can't do
in my
that.
case, it was my cat. My dad just sort of adopted her.
Mm-hmm.
He just sort of co-opted her. I'd
Yep.
come in and he'd be watching TV with her on the couch, and I'd be like, "I'm sorry, is that my cat anymore, or have I lost my cat completely?" And I
Mm-hmm.
was fine with it because they loved each other, but I joke about it. And he really just he'd be sitting there, kind of like the Bond movie,
Mm-hmm.
Octopussy with the Doctor No petting the white cat,
Or Dr. Evil having the hairless
Doctor
cat.
Evil. Exactly. So there would be my dad on phone calls and me petting the cat, and I was like, I'm in a Bond movie. you know, I was like, this is so crazy.
So this documentary, you've shown it to me. Did Nancy Allen see it?
She did. I had a private screening for all the participants of the documentary
Oh, nice.
and a few of my father's friends. It was a private screening. It was not open to the public. It was just so that the people who had worked on the film, and the people who had helped me get the film together should see it. I only just finished it about a month
Well, I appreciate
ago.
you
And
sending it my way. Like I said, I learned a lot of stuff did not know, and some
yeah, and
stuff
I'm trying to
yeah.
sell it now. So that's it. I'm trying to sell it to get it out there. I'm talking to some distributors. I'm waiting to hear from Sundance and Slam Dance. They send out their acceptance or rejection letters in the first week of December. And again, Sundance. I'm just saying, Waldo Salt
Waldo
Screenwriting Award
Salt.
would not exist
Did you
without
tell
George
them
Litto.
that?
I did send them a cover letter, and I said it quite boldly
You
that
should.
it would not exist. And it's not to say that Waldo wasn't a great writer, but I don't know that his career would have come back with such flourish without the efforts of my father. I mean, even Jennifer Salt says that in my documentary. And agents just don't do that kind of thing. And agents don't lend their clients money like that and look out for their careers. My father was literally personally invested in their success,
Hmm.
and not just financially, but emotionally as well, because he knew what it meant for them to come back, what it meant to them as well. And I think you really see that genuinely when he says, after the Waldo's won the Academy Awards, and you show him saying it was a really wonderful moment. And I think that is absolutely indicative of how he treated his clients. They weren't just his clients. They were people he was emotionally invested in. And so much of this business now, because it's corporatized, has become transactional. And I mean, the recent strikes are a perfect example. Iger sitting on his $400 million yacht saying writers and actors need to get realistic. Zaslav now saying in the press that the Writers Guild were right all along. We ended up giving them almost everything they asked for, and SAG too.
Yeah, they were a
I
little
mean,
disappointed when Taylor Swift put her concert movie out there in the theater.
right. But you know what? They also, they arrogantly forgot that this is a community that happens because of the artists, and
Yep.
we all work together, and we all have to be impersonally invested in each other's success, because everything works better if we are.
Yeah, they were
And
disappointed at Taylor Swift and they're disappointed in South Park, but yay on South Park.
but the truth is, yeah, but Taylor Swift was able to do what she did because the theaters were empty. If the theaters had been full with summer movies because there was no strike, it might have been harder. She may have accomplished it. I'm not saying she wouldn't have, but it may have been harder for her to have gotten theater dates, but the truth is, there were hardly any movies out this summer, you know? And
Well,
here's Warner
Barbie and
Brothers still with,
Oppenheimer.
yeah. Well, and Warner Brothers still lost a $500 million, with Barbie being the biggest summer movie, and doing is like, I think it's done a $500 million worth of business. So, Zaslav, it wasn't directly attributed to him, but the whispers were that Zaslav was the one who said that, I hope the writers and the actors get evicted from their homes. I mean, what kind of, it's worse than Scrooge. This is like, the perils of Pauline, with the guy with the curly mustache going like, I can't pay the rent, but you must pay the rent, and putting the girl tied up on the railroad tracks. I mean, that's what I saw. They were like caricatures of evil. And I don't care, by the way, that I have to work with them, and I say that because they should be ashamed of themselves.
Hmm.
Having Forget what they think. Having said that about the people that make this business possible, for them to make all that money, and they forgot that. This is a community. This is a community that we all need to stick together, and we need to work together, and we need to take care of each other. And that, you can argue about what that means, but you can't forget that purpose. And they all forgot that. And I think the writers and the actors, good for them for sticking together and showing what community is, so that we could overcome. I say we because I'm a member of SAG. We could overcome this horrific idea that we somehow, the ones who create the content that makes them rich, should get realistic while they're sitting on their $400 million yachts.
Oh yeah, and they were even and I heard this a lot on some of the platforms I listened to about them telling I don't know whether it was Clownfish TV, one of the YouTube channels, that was saying that they weren't allowed to promote stuff, or they wouldn't be allowed to join this or join that. I'm like, take number one, this is free publicity. And number two, take the bullying tactics somewhere
Well,
else,
no, that wasn't bullying tactics. That was very deliberate by the unions to say, if you studios don't think we matter, if we're irrelevant to you and you can just relegate us to AI,
Hmm.
then you don't need us to promote your movies. You don't need us to promote anything. So they had to make it across the board ban, which I'm sorry affected you, but they had to make it across
Oh,
the
it did.
board
No,
ban to make their point.
I'm not talking about the actors here. I'm trying to think. I think it had to do with the studios,
Yeah, the
but
studios
yep.
were, refused to sit down at the bargaining table. They walked out
Hmm.
in the beginning. And then they said, we hope they get evicted. And they should get reasonable while they sit on their $400 million yacht in the middle of the Mediterranean, or wherever the hell he was. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just,
they have no idea. like
They
Toronto
forgot that
back,
they were a part of community. You're not a
Toronto,
corporate boss.
yeah, Toronto background aside, like I live in a little studio apartment, you know, they don't understand that because they're living in their
No,
$400 million lot
it's
yacht.
not that they don't understand that. They're not unintelligent. They just don't want to.
Yep.
I know these people. I've dealt with these people. You know, they didn't all come from money. Most of them didn't. Most of them came from middle class backgrounds, you know, and they themselves became rich. They did really well. They made a few smart decisions, or their partners did, and they
Mm-hmm.
became rich. And and it doesn't mean that they took some magic pill that makes them smarter than everybody else or better than everybody else. It means they got lucky. And it means, you know, maybe they did do a few very intelligent things. But again, we are all part of a community.
Yep.
This is an artistic community first, because it is the art that generates the income. And we have to remember to take care of each other.
Yep.
And the unions understood that, and they stood up for each other, and they took care of each other. There were, you know, actors and writers were donating to charities to give grocery cards and food pantries and make sure that the people who were really suffering, you know, they did as much as they could for them. You know, I personally helped out people who I know who were suffering. And but the studio heads and the studios, they forgot that. And they got spanked for it. And I'm glad, because I'm glad the public opinion turned against them.
Mm-hmm.
They incorrectly suspected the public opinion would be for them. But you know, they underestimated the public. And really Iger screwed himself. That photo op was really just terrible.
You know
But
what's funny is that they don't realize there's more of us than them.
no, they do. But see that it's easier, but the masses don't come out en masse generally and stick together. They figured the longer the strike went on, the more they could divide us. And I said, it's divide and conquer. That is how the establishment, those who want to stay in power, keep power, is they divide people. And that is exactly what happened in HUAC. They divided people, Reds and the rest of us. And anybody who dared say anything that they thought was a little too liberal or too socialist would get labeled. Or if you associated with somebody, you got labeled, and then you got pushed aside into that group, and you couldn't work, and you were blacklisted, and your livelihood was taken away. It was a scare tactic.
Yep.
And that hasn't changed.
No.
And that hasn't changed. But the SAG after strike and the WGA strike are proof that when we stick together, the masses stick together for a common cause, a common purpose. And it wasn't just SAG and AFTRA. IA supported us too, IATSE, you know, the International Alliance of Theater and Stage
Mm-hmm.
workers. They did that too. And I applaud them for that. And their collective bargaining agreement's coming up in January. I think the studios are not stupid enough to start another strike. I think they're going to, you know, make a deal. I hope that
Yeah.
they're not stupid enough to make another strike, to cause another strike. And I say they caused the strike because I have seen what they're asking for. It's not unrealistic. It's not crazy. It's not, you know, unfair. It's just basic, you know, standards of living increases, which everyone should have. You know, if prices and everything else goes up, then so should our wages, because how else are we going to pay for it?
You know, it's funny you say that the whole AI thing, I'm just befuddled at that. I'm like, I don't think legally they can do that.
Well, under intellectual property law, and I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on
Mm-hmm.
TV, but from a business capacity, I can state with almost unequivocal certainty that intellectual property law dictates that every intellectual property has to be licensed for every kind of media. So if you have music rights and you've only licensed them for vinyl, then when CDs came along, you have to license them to a company for CDs. unless the license says for all media contemplated and uncontemplated heretofore in perpetuity, right? So where you can, writing scripts are intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to make a remake of a movie, you have to pay certain fees. You have to pay certain fees to make sure that you have to activate those rights. You don't have them automatically. They are based on what they call consideration, meaning payment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But your image isn't. And I think what actors like Clooney and Damon and Julia Roberts, the big ones, ought to be doing is lobbying Congress right now to make our images, our voices, and our images intellectual property and copyrightable so that you can license your own image. Because technically, when I do a documentary, I have to get a waiver of release for your image. Isn't that saying that I don't have the right to use your image unless you sign something?
Mm-hmm.
What the studios were trying to do was get someone, an extra, to sign away their image rights for the rest of their lives
Yeah.
on one payment, on one show, and get them right there. Or like, you don't sign it, you're fired. Well, usually in contractual terms, when you force someone to sign something on the spot, it's called coercion. So, but most actors aren't going to know that. And especially, extras that are trying to get ahead and get started, they don't have fancy lawyers. And again, we're part of a community. If you want to decimate this community, which is pretty much what they were saying by AI, and some of them were talking about union busting, then you're not a part of this community. You're just trying to profit off this community. So let's just call a spade a spade.
Mm-hmm.
Then we are not on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to say that you're on the same team, and you want to say that, you can't say that you're on the same team as Clooney and pat him on the back, and pay him too much money, and then go and say to some extra, I want to, take your image rights for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because that's, again, divide and conquer.
Yep. Yep.
And I will go back to the blacklisted as a perfect example
Mm-hmm.
of both corporate and politics dividing people, because the studios required a loyalty oath at the time of the blacklist in order to keep working. And so we as people, if the community at the time had rallied as a whole, rallied behind the blacklisted writers, even if the studios had wanted to capitulate, if they all stood up and said, Reagan at the head of SAG, instead of turning everybody in, had said, we're standing for the talent, this would never have happened. Mm-hmm. So you're right, there are more of us than there are of them, but we have to stick together.
Yeah, that is true. Yep. That is true.
And I really applaud my dad for being this one singular guy who built off of what Kirk Douglas and Otto Preminger did with Spartacus and said, that's not enough. And I'll say it again. This documentary needs to be seen by every aspiring filmmaker so that we all understand what we have to do to keep our business alive. This documentary, not because I made it, but because it's about a subject that's so important. This documentary, my father, anyone in the Academy sees this, they ought to be giving him the Herschel Award, humanitarian award, because I don't know what's more humanitarian than giving people their lives back.
Yep, I agree.
And it would send a message to the entertainment community that standing up for artists and for artists' rights is the right thing to do.
Absolutely. You know what? I thought it was a wonderful documentary. And like I said, I was so engrossed in it, and I loved it. And there's a lot of stuff I learned that I'd never known before, like I said, the John Garfield bit, but also bits of humor, like the meatball thing just made me laugh.
Oh yeah, and the Waldo pot story was pretty good too.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that line. Um, was it your mom flushed the pot down the toilet and then
Well, yeah, let's not
uh,
give it away completely, but yes, it's just
the the
hilarious.
the best toilet.
So yeah, there
Oh,
were some fun times through all of this turmoil. There were a lot of fun times, and that's partly what I was trying to convey as well.
I didn't know
That
that
through
side
all
of
of this,
Robert Altman.
oh well, he made a movie called Pot au Feu, a short film about what the
I
world would be
never
like.
knew that. I never knew of that film until this documentary either.
A UCLA archive has it, the
Yeah,
UCLA archive. So write to UCLA and say you want them to do an Altman retrospective and show Pot au Feu as part of it.
yeah. I knew MASH and I know a lot of, stuff right up on stuff like Gosford. I really enjoyed. But he
McCabe and
did.
Mrs. Miller,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I
even that
mean,
whole day in the park is a really small but terrific little film starring Sandy Dennis, and it's Altman's homage to Hitchcock, and it's a psychological thriller. It's really very good.
I've had Hitchcock's granddaughter on here back in 2016.
That's cool.
Yeah, I was a big Hitchcock fan. He changed the way I look at movies, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
I think he was a visionary. He may have been a crazy guy, but he was a visionary. And, some of my favorite films are his as well. Absolutely. I mean,
Yep.
absolutely Dressed to Kill is to some degree an homage to Psycho, and Obsession is an homage to Vertigo.
Yep. And Sisters is an homage to Rear Window.
As is Body W, as is Body Double,
Body
right?
Double, that's right. Your dad never like your dad did Blow Up. Excuse me, Blowout. And I think we talked about this last time you were on the show, but like he missed out on Scarface, but he missed out on Body Double, that just sounds
He
like
had his
something.
reasons. He had
Yeah,
his reasons. There were
yeah.
there were some things going on at the time. Scarface especially was I think he and De Palma had to kind of run their course for a while, and then my dad also got a job. He was offered to be the CEO of Filmways Pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he thought that Filmways was the successor in interest to AIP Arkoff International, which had the rights to Dress to Kill and Blowout, and the company was going to go bankrupt. And I think he wanted to make sure that the company stayed solvent so that he would make sure that he and Brian got paid, which
Yeah.
fairly important. So there was also that there, and artists and relationships in the business, like many partnerships, like marriages, sometimes they need to move on for a while. But he and Brian stayed in touch over the years, and I tried to get Brian in the documentary, but I understand he was not well. I unfortunately had to shut down. I started before the pandemic, about 4 months before the pandemic shut us down, and I had to stop. And that 2 years that I lost in in not being able to interview anybody, because most everybody was much older and they were very uncomfortable with a film crew even as limited as we were like 3 people. More,
Wow.
I had to wait, so that time I waited, I lost a few possibilities because of age and
Mm-hmm.
people's infirmities. So Brian wasn't available, but Nancy, I think, more than made up.
I love Nancy Allen. Like, I'm so happy to get her on the show. I hope to have her on again at some point. If anything, just to have her on here for 2 hours talking back and forth with Skittles. I mean,
Well, maybe she'll come back on once the doc comes out. Who knows?
yeah. And but I gotta say, you did a fantastic job with this, and I love the fact that you had members of your family as part of this. I learned a lot about your father and mother's connection and this and that, and having your sister in there, and even your sister's daughter, your niece, the fact that she's
Chloe.
into music, Chloe, yeah, into music and whatnot. I love that little bit there. It shows the influence because I had forgot that you mentioned your dad was into music. I think you mentioned that before when I interviewed you, but but of course, yes,
And all
absolutely.
that music we sing in the doc. I sing a couple of his original tunes, and the Louis Armstrong song plays, the one that he recorded. And the last song, at the end, that I'm singing is a George Litto original, and we're actually in the process of doing an album. I'm in discussions with a singer that I can't mention yet until I tie him up contractually,
Oh,
and
it's
we're
not gonna
going
be
to
Taylor
do it.
Swift?
No, it's not Taylor Swift. Not nearly that big, though I would, roll over and die if Taylor Swift would sing one of my dad's songs. But they're very sort of old-fashioned American standard type songs. I don't know if she'd be into that. It'd be more like Lady Gaga's style, if anybody. But
What?
I am making an album, and I'm hoping that I'm in discussions with Universal Music, and I'm hoping that their jazz label will pick it up.
Why didn't you
So
have John Lithgow at least do some ballet in the documentary? We could.
I tried to really focus on the blacklist in the first hour plus, and then we got into Obsession and Over the Edge and Dress to Kill. And because Over the Edge and Obsession and Dress to Kill and Blowout were all Brian,
Hmm.
it made sense to really talk to Nancy about that, because the closest relationship really were between Nancy and Brian and my dad at the moment.
Hmm.
John didn't really know my father. He came, he did his job, and then he sort of left.
I'm just trying to picture him sticking his leg up on that thing.
Oh no, he didn't do that. I think he came more to just sort of get an idea of how we move, and it was very charming actually. He was very sweet. And
So Natalie Portman was not going to lose Black Swan to him.
no, definitely not. I'm sure he would agree with that too.
Another thing too, getting onto the humor mark, was Michael Caine ever upset that Playboy never approached him for a spread after Dress to Kill?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Michael Caine, but he did make a very interesting looking woman, didn't he?
Well, he said he
And
got to play his mom.
oh well, he's hilarious. I mean, I got to give it to Michael. My father always said that he really enjoyed working with Michael Caine. He felt he was incredibly professional. He knew his lines. He showed up on time. He was polite to everybody and pleasant. And that's the way it should be. There was no ego. There was no, problems. And that's so important to remember. Again, we're all part of a community. We're all trying to make something together. And every person has their job. And yes, some jobs are more important than others, but we need everyone to do their jobs to do what we do to make the movie. I just made this documentary, and I was the giant production team of me, myself, and I wish I could have split myself into three people because it might have been easier. But I was the writer, the director, the producer, the financier. I also had to take care of all the bills, so I was the accountant. I was negotiating all the deals with the archive with my archivist. I had a lawyer but I didn't have a lawyer handle every single little detail, because that would have cost me my arm and a leg. And normally on a film crew, you have people doing wardrobe, hair, makeup. Because I was on a short budget, because I wanted to make sure that I made the movie about my father that I wanted to make. So it was on my money, and I had to sort of figure out how to make it work with what I had. I had to just, I had been on movie sets my entire life, so I knew what to do, right? But it's so much easier if I had been able to afford 10 people on my crew full time. It would have been 1,000 times easier. And those jobs are important.
Hmm.
But again, we were shooting sporadically. We were getting this person here and that person there. So nobody was working really full time except me. And that's why we were able to do it. And it took me, once I went back to work, it took me a little more than a year, maybe 15 months to complete the film once I went back to work. So I'd say all in, it took me almost 2 years, which
Hmm.
is not bad. A documentary takes about that long. But because, there's interviews and people's schedules and things like that. And in the meantime, we were editing. and I had some problems with some crew members too. I had to let some people go, and one guy up and quit because he didn't like working with somebody, and things happen. You just have to, as a producer and the filmmaker, the financier, you just got to keep going and get it done, you know? So I understand that. But if you all remember that we're all trying to do something great, and nobody gets any accolades if the movie doesn't come out,
No.
right?
I was looking at the filmography too. You and your dad were both involved. Producer, I think one of you was executive producer on The Crew. I saw that in the theater. So I mean, Richard Dreyfuss, Burt Reynolds.
I was 28 years old when we were filming that movie down in Miami, in South Beach in Miami. And you know, every day I took the last tour of duty. There were a few producers, and we sort of divided up who was going to be in Miami. And I ended up, of course, the most junior person on the totem pole. I got the 2 weeks in August. Right, the worst weather ever was mine. Thank you very much. So it was the last 2 weeks of shooting, and I showed up, and I had already met everybody before, but I showed up on set, and I have to tell you, I adored Burt Reynolds. I thought
Yeah.
he was so great. He was really sweet. Richard kind of kept to himself. Dreyfuss kept to himself. You know, um, uh, Frankie Vincent was also in the movie, who was in a lot of Scorsese movies. He was in, Goodfellas and a few others. He was great. But, a lot of these guys, but I really bonded with Jennifer Tilly and Lady Kazan. They were absolutely fantastic.
Hmm.
They were a lot of fun. We were all staying in the same hotel, and we'd find each other at the bar, and whether we were drinking water or anything else, they were just a riot. And as a 28-year-old producing my first movie, because I had actually found that script and kind of put the deal together, and and it's verbally with everybody, and then sort of tied it up in a little bow and handed it to my dad, and then he did the rest, which was the heavy lifting. But still, I found it. That's how I got the producing credit, is that I,
Hmm.
put this little deal together with a young producer named Lisa Elzey, who ended up becoming the head of Ridley Scott's company, and, running Luc Besson's company. And she went on to quite big things. So, we were both young ladies at the time trying to navigate the business, but it was great fun. I had a lot of fun working on that movie.
Any memories of Carrie Ann Moss in that?
I didn't see her that
Oh
much.
no.
She was shooting, I think she only shot like 2 days. The entire 2 weeks I was there was my first 2 days.
Hmm.
And sort of the first day I was there, I was semi jet lagged and kind of not, I was trying to get the lay of the land. And then the second day, we were shooting in some exterior. It was very, very hot. And so the minute she was off camera, she was in her air conditioned trailer. And I don't blame her, because honestly,
Hmm.
it was brutal. Um, and it was so hot that we were shooting on the beach one day, and I had like a t-shirt and shorts on set, because nobody dresses fancy on the set. And in between setups, when there was nothing for me to do, when I had a break, I would literally took off my clothes, ran down the beach, and jumped in the water so I could cool off, because I was so hot. It was like you'd get out of the water, and 3 minutes later you were schwitzing everywhere. You were just sweating. You'd start to sweat before the water dried on your body. It was so hot. So that's Miami in the summer.
And I've never been there, so I couldn't tell you. But
Oh, it's like living in an armpit. It's so humid.
yeah.
It's so humid and hot. It's crazy. And I had gone to college in New Orleans, so I was quite used to, hot, humid summers, but I think I got unlucky that summer. It was particularly brutal.
Do you still hear any from Jennifer Salt? I know she did you hear her voice in your documentary, but
I actually got that from a podcast. Um,
I'd never got her on here. I think you gave me her email, but I never heard back because I love Sisters, and I got, of course, Midnight Cowboy. I never ever heard back from her. So
I don't know. I know I don't really talk to her. I mean, my dad was very friendly with Waldo.
hmm.
He was his best man at his wedding, and they were very good friends for a very long time. But I never really knew Jennifer. I don't think I've actually ever met her. Um, and I'm significantly younger than she is too. But I actually did email and ask her to be a part of this documentary, and she declined. So I had heard that podcast that I took her voice from, and I called the podcaster who owned the rights to it, and I just licensed it from him. And I said, "Well, I got what I needed, and that's that." You know, and I'm
Hmm.
sorry. I would have. I think maybe if she ever gets around to seeing the film, she might have wished that she participated because it's a very flattering portrayal of her father,
Yep.
and um, who I know my father loved and respected enormously. So
I always wondered, because she appears nude in Midnight Cowboy, and I wondered what he felt about that, because that was,
hmm, I don't know.
I don't
I don't
know,
know if he was on set that day, but
because I know if it was my daughter, I'd be like, this is a little weird.
I don't know. I honestly can't comment on that. I don't know that he was on set every day. Writers aren't always on set every day, so maybe that's one of the days that he did not come to set, so he didn't have to see that. But he wrote the script, so I think he knew what was coming, and she was cast in it. So
Crazy Annie.
I mean, he must have somehow tacitly had agreed to it, or maybe he didn't have a choice. Maybe she just said, "I'm doing it," and that's it. But as long as the director agreed, and that was enough.
I
I
got
don't know. I
sisters.
really don't know.
I got sisters here on Blu-ray too. Yeah, wanted to talk to her about that because it's hard to get hot in touch with anybody from that film. But I love De Palma's thrillers the best. Uh,
I do too, except for
yeah,
Untouchables. Except
I
for the
saw
Untouchables.
I saw Untouchables. I saw that in the theaters. But for me, like Dress to Kill, Body Double Sisters, Phantom of the Paradise, Obsession, Carrie, The Fury, Blowout.
Blowout.
Movies like that. And even Femme Fatale took me back. I was like, oh, it was so nice to see De Palma go back to that because I was not a fan of Mission to Mars. So it's like it was so
No.
nice to see him back and do Femme Fatale, and
But yeah, that De Palma was at his best in that sort of niche.
hmm
Um, and he was especially in his youth, he did some very innovative and extraordinary things with camera. I mean, some of the shots that opening sequence in Dress to Kill, where there's 20 minutes that's without dialogue, is really quite extraordinary.
he's got quite a
That's some
lot in that
really
movie with no
genius.
dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some genius storytelling there. So
Like
I get it.
like the opening shower scene, no dialogue. The closing shower scene, no dialogue. The museum sequence was brilliant. And
Hmm.
of course, there's a scene in an institution. Like none of this is dialogue. It's Pino Donaggio, of course, who also did the
Great
music to
score.
Carrie. Yeah, he such great work, as a composer.
He also did the
And
music to Blowout as well.
yes, and yeah, he did Carrie as well. And it was great stuff. I actually forgot that Bernard Herrmann had done music for Obsession. He did Taxi Driver too.
Those were his last two scores.
The last two,
He was
famous, of course,
working
for
on them
Psycho.
both. Yeah, just as he was before he passed away. And he was nominated.
hmm
Obsession was nominated for the Academy Award as well. So yes, it's a very, for music and movie lovers and movie score lovers, it is considered a critically acclaimed score. But I think Pino's done some beautiful work. I really love
Yep.
his score for Dress to Kill and Blowout. And I like Carrie too, but I particularly like the scores for Dress to Kill and Blowout. So we actually got a mechanical license, or I'm actually getting my lawyer to finish that up, get a mechanical license for the Jack and Sally theme from Blowout that we play underneath Nancy as she's telling the story of getting the part in Blowout.
Yeah, look at that. 3 copies of Dress to Kill here, huh?
You're not a fan or anything.
No, not at all. Not at all. No,
Well,
I
Greg, I am so glad that you let me come on and talk about my documentary. And, I really hope that anybody who listens to this, yeah, I'm on social media. My Instagram handle is the Andria Litto, and my name is spelled ANDRIALITTO, the Andria Litto. You can find me there. And, I'll keep people posted on, the festival circuit and sales and when the movie's going to come out. And, for you De Palma fans and George Litto fans and people who are interested in the Blacklist, Waldo Salt and Abraham Polanski and Dalton Trumbo and Michael Wilson. Yes, stay tuned because I've only just begun to fight to sell this thing.
You know what? And you're welcome to come back on here again. I gotta say, I was honored when I got that email from you asking to come back on my show. I was like, wow, because I knew you'd done the documentary, but I didn't know what else was going on with it. And the fact that you had remembered me, that meant a lot to me that
Thank
you
you.
really did, that you had thought of me back on the show, it meant a lot. So
Well, it
this is
meant a lot to me that you did a tribute to my father after he passed away. So that said something to me as well. It said that this is a person who appreciates my father's work. And so, you know, it's it's a mutual admiration society.
well, you know what? Your dad did a lot of great things, and I've learned a lot. You learned a lot more through that documentary. Like I said, I hope that it gets into the festival circus, and I hope more people get to see it. I know Tommy
Yes, the
Kovac
festival circus.
circus. I know Tommy Kovac from Splat from the past had told me last night that he's expressing interest to have you come on his show.
I would be happy to. Be
Yep,
my pleasure. Be
yep,
my pleasure.
yep. So he had mentioned that last night because a lot of times, he'll throw ideas for guests. He'll say, "Have you had somebody from this film for its anniversary or that film?" Or he'd let me know who was a good guest and who he had issues with, and this and that, and so we'll throw guest ideas back and forth, and he asked what shows I had coming up, and I had mentioned that you had reached out to me, and he says, "Oh yeah, I should reach out to her about that," and so I'll let
Well,
him
I
know.
will. Please do, and I'll reach out to him too because I believe we are social media buddies, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
So,
well. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for thinking of me. And when this comes out into the festival circuit, I'd love to have you come back. I'm open. You know what? You want to advertise something, you want to promote something. It's never a problem for me to open up time for you.
that's kind of you. Thank you very much. I will let you know in a few weeks if Sundance or Slam Dance picks up the film.
Yeah. One last
So,
question.
sure.
Did you get those glasses from Michael Caine?
No, I did not. No, they're blue light glasses actually because I spend so much time staring at screens that I don't want my eyes to disintegrate.
Well, they're like pink rimmed, and I thought,
Yes, I like pink.
was
I
was you
liked pink before Barbie.
was you raiding through Michael Caine's secret closet?
Now, most people ask me if I got it because of the Barbie movie, and I say no, I liked pink before Barbie. I was one of these girls who always thought pink was a powerful color.
Well, you know what? Bret the Hitman Hart wore pink and black, and he was a WWE champion.
That's right.
There you
Pink is a
go.
powerful color.
You know what?
Besides, it's the wearer that matters.
You want me to tell you something? I do have pink clothing here.
Good for you.
I have
My
dress
my
shirts.
fiance will wear a pink shirt.
I've got no issue with it. I've got an Avril Lavigne concert shirt that has pink on it. I've got a Mean Girls t-shirt here. That's
I love
that's
that.
pink. I've interviewed a couple of people from Mean Girls. Yeah, but I got a Mean Girls shirt with pink on it, and I've got that movie, the Greasy Strangler. I interviewed a couple people from that, and the whole thing they were wearing while jogging was pink, so I got pink beanie, with greasy on it. Yeah, I got no issues with pink at all. I think pink's a great color.
I agree. I
Hmm.
always have.
Yeah,
It's not question of whether it's feminine, because by the way, feminine is powerful. I'm all for that. But that's a whole other story. But
actually,
I'm gonna let you wrap this
uh,
up because I actually have to run off at 6. I have to leave for my next thing. I have to go to a meeting because I'm still, like I said, trying to sell this movie. So
let me guess, you have to run off because the cats are too lazy to do any running.
yeah, well, that's 2. I have to feed them before I leave. So
See, mine's just laying over there, you know. You
yeah,
know what?
I have 2 of them on the cat tree over there, I think. Yep, sacked out, completely sacked out. So you
Well, if
know,
you're talking to Nancy Allen, send her my love, please.
I will.
Yep.
In
And
fact, I'll send her the podcast when you send it to me completed.
I'll do that, Yeah, because like I said, I got that yeah, high def version since I talked to her last, but yeah, I'd love to have her come back on at some point whenever it's good, but I like I said, I'll say it again. I was honored, very honored and touched that you reached out to me, because normally I reach out, but you reaching out to me said a lot, and it definitely boosted my self-esteem. I'll tell you that, because it reminded me that there's people out there that really appreciate what I do, and the fact that it comes from you, that meant a lot to
Hmm.
me. That
Well,
meant a lot.
like I said, we got to remember the people that make us. They make the money for us because they put their butts in seats, or they, download our films, or they go buy DVDs, or we have to remember that. And so I'll always come back no matter what I'm doing. You can quote me on that.
Well, this door is open for you. Don't ever hesitate. You got something to
Deal,
promote, you let me know. The
deal.
door is open for you.
I'll look forward to getting this from you, and I'll keep you posted if anything happens. Okay.
Before I let you go, I would love a plug for my show.
Oh, sure. How do you want me to, you want me to do this is,
Yep,
you know,
listening to Greg
uh,
Gilbert on Python's Paradise.
okay. You're listening to Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise, and tune in for this episode with Andria Litto and any other episode because, frankly, Python Gilbert is the guy to listen to.
Absolutely. And of course, we're paying tribute again to George Litto, who raised a wonderful daughter, raised a wonderful family, but definitely you can see that he passed on the genes to Andrea.
Thank you. And I hope that when My Father Moves Mountains comes out, that you guys will all go see it. And in the meantime, feel free to share that around social media that you'd like to see a documentary about George Litto and the blacklist, and the courage of somebody to stand up and to put an end to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have yourself a wonderful night, or
Thank you.
kick back and get the cats to do it.
Okay, thank you. You have a
God,
great day or evening. Thank you so much.
absolutely. God bless you.
Good night, Greg.
Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye bye.